In pop culture, the word prediction brings to mind Nostradamus' quatrains predicting future events. In science, it indicates a causal relationship between A and B. In the clinical setting, does prediction mean the same as either of these, or does its usage mean something else?
I think it's interesting to know that when weather people on television or in the media predict tomorrow's weather, that most of us don't really understand what that means. So questions about prediction are challenging. So if they say it's 70% rain, what does that actually mean? It means that on 7 out of 10 days like this one, we're going to have rain. And when it comes to the statistical and predictive algorithms in my outcomes and in the other outcome management systems, it's more like the weather. Is it perfect? No, but it is better than clinical judgment alone. So we're putting those two things together. How is the clinician thinking about what will happen? And can we augment their ability to predict events by using a predictive algorithm?
In the My Outcomes system, the initial outcome rating scale ORS is used to create the on-track line, which represents the predicted trajectory for success. It also creates the off-track line, representing possible deterioration. Is it really that simple to predict success and deterioration in the long term from a single data point?
Well, the question really is, what is the best predictor of the outcome? And what we know is that that initial score controls the largest amount of variance in terms of eventual outcomes, more than, say, the diagnosis, more than the clinician's judgment, more than treatment history. It really does have the strongest impact on what's going to happen in the future. But let's remember what those trajectory lines are really about. So hang with me, because the language can be a little bit confusing at first. That green line is the least amount of change a client can experience from session to session and still be on track for a successful outcome at the end. And what exactly does that mean? We looked at a huge sample of cases, people who scored score X at the beginning and how they progressed over time. So it is a very conservative estimate, that particular green line, about whether or not the person is on track. Everybody who succeeded at that score scored at least that at that particular session. The same is true of the red line, except the red line is the most amount of change a client could report from session to session and still be off track for a successful outcome in the end. Again, huge sample of cases. Those who did not succeed, none of those cases scored higher than that red line. So it does give us a good idea about whether we are on or off track. However, predictions are not forecasts, they're not set in stone. So a new statistic has been implemented that actually takes into account not just that first session score, but the impact of any changes a clinician might make between visits to improve the chances of success at the end. That's called the Success Probability Index.
The My Outcomes Success Probability Index (SPI) is calculated at the beginning of each session using past ORS and SRS session rating scale scores to predict successful outcomes. How is possible to use a client's past reports on their psychosocial status and their feedback on their relationship with their therapist to predict outcomes?
So it's not just the scores themselves, but actually how those scores change over time that really matters. So I'll give you an example. We learned very early on that when scores were declining on the SRS between sessions, that was associated with poor outcome scores and higher dropout rates. We needed to have a system that was dynamic, that reacted to whatever changes the clinician put into place and the progress or lack thereof that the client made between visits. So it's looking not just at the raw scores, but also how those scores develop. And sometimes the formula is using the slope of the scores. Did they go up generally, stay the same, or go down? Sometimes it's simply the difference between one session and another that makes a difference. The key here is that using some fairly sophisticated statistics, the researchers that were involved in the creation of the SPI were able to correlate changes in those scores over time with a reliable change by the end of care. What's a reliable change? A change that's greater than chance, would have happened anyway, greater than maturation or simply passage of time, and greater than statistical error. So it's the pattern among those scores. And in general, it's a good idea if outcomes are improving and if the SRS scores or the relationship or engagement scores are also improving. This just gives us a much more fine-tuned prediction.
Continuing on with the SPI, this statistic is supposed to predict the likelihood of a successful outcome as of the current session. Is it really possible to predict success in a 50 to 60 minute time period?
I would say no one session predicts very much. The initial score, for example, on whatever outcome score that you're using controls about 14 to 17% of the variability in outcome scores at the end of treatment. The more indices we put into the formula, the more accurate our predictions are. Are they perfect? No. What they're designed to do is kick the clinician into action when those figures start to trend downward. So when you start to see that red signal or yellow signal, this should not sponsor panic, nor should it be believed to be the absolute predetermined outcome of the case, but rather an opportunity to engage the person in conversation about what needs to change in care in order to increase the chances that they stay engaged and are successful by the end of it.
Are the on-track line, off-track line and the SPI predicting the exact same thing, or are they looking at the same thing but from different perspectives?
The on-track and off-track lines are static trajectories. As you probably noticed, they don't change after that particular first session. The SPI gives us a dynamic prediction. It has, so to speak, a memory. It adjusts based on what happens in the client's life and the clinician's responsiveness to the individual client from session to session. So they both have the same objective. That is to alert the clinician when they might need to lean into the process and adjust services for a better fit and effect. But they are doing so in different ways.
We've been talking about successful outcomes. How do we exactly determine when success has been achieved, and will it look the same for the on-track trajectory and the SPI?
The question about what constitutes a successful outcome is really very important. And believe it or not, for most of the history of psychological care, it was defined by the process. Did the client attend? Did they do their homework? Did they do what they were supposed to do? Rather than looking at whether or not they had experienced a change in their well-being or their experience of symptoms by the end of care. The latter are atheoretical. They're not tied to any particular model or treatment approach. In the 1980s, a colleague, Neil Jacobson, puzzled over how could we determine that whatever changes took place in a person's well-being were greater than chance, would have happened anyway, greater than maturation, they got better because time passed, or measurement error, meaning that there's lots of noise in any signal. Classic example of that is your bathroom scale. You know, if you stand on different parts of the scale, you get slightly different numbers. A reliable change has to exceed all three. so that we can successfully say that the changes measured by the outcome tool are due to the care above and beyond chance, maturation, and measurement error.